This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 289, the December 1st. And I had to look twice when I saw that date. December 1st edition of the DRF Players Podcast 2017. Last time I checked. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatal, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker, a napping Muggsy, the handicapping Labrador, alongside. Joined on the telephone today. We're making him work hard this week, folks. Not only did he do the show with us earlier in the week, not only did he record his segment for the Out of the Gate show, we also had him on last night along with Mike Beer, talking about the same race card we're going to be getting to a little bit later in the show, the last NYRA Super Stakes card of the year. You know him, you love him. He, of course, is the People's Champion from the planet Texas, Jonathan Kitchen. JK, what's up?
Hello and welcome.
That's my line. You can't say that.
Me and Craig, the producer, Craig, have been doing it all morning. We got on the call before you, and we were both doing our best impressions. Craig's pretty good, too, now. He even did hello, welcome, and he hit the Brooklyn bunker line, and he even did a little mug shout-out, so...
I love it. I'm going to have to be like, you know who Michael Buffer is, JK?
I do.
I'm going to have to be like Michael Buffer and get my patented phrase, like, so nobody else can say, let's get ready to rumble. Got to pay the whatever it is, $250,000 or whatever the man makes to go in there and do that little spiel. I'm going to have to get that done with hello and welcome here at some point. But yes, hello and welcome. We've got a fun show for you today. We've got a bunch of questions from listeners. We're going to dive in to this supercard. Anything before we get started, though? Anything on your mind? Anything you feel like discussing before we start looking into some questions from the listeners today?
No, I don't know. I'm particularly in a good mood today. I don't know what it is. I'm excited. It's good racing. I think that I'm going to get you to shave some good facial hair. We'll see if you woke up with any this morning. I'm just looking forward to a fun weekend and feeling inspired this morning for whatever reason.
I love it. You're usually such a negative guy, and so when we get a chance to catch a little bit of enthusiasm for you, it's a beautiful thing. The facial hair bet, as folks may have known a few weeks ago, months ago now, for the QE2 at Keeneland, we did have the famous Fu Manchu bet. I won round one. I have some hesitation about this round two, but I might just do it for the good of the show, JK. What do you think?
Hey, you're the they say people's champ. For me, you're the people's man. You're the guy that everyone looks to for integrity and commitment and dedication and selflessness. So I would expect nothing more from you.
Sounds like I should be running for office. Actually, those qualities these days aren't essential, apparently. But we'll get to more about the Fu Manchu bet as the show goes along. I'm looking through some of the questions. Some of them are for an upcoming show, I realize, which is going to be sometime in the next couple of weeks. We're going to have Mike Maloney on the show, and we're going to try to do questions from listeners only, those who've read Betting with an Edge, his new book, available at drf.com. Also available are signed copies if you holler at me on Twitter, @LoonsBoldly, or hit me up at the podcast email, podcast@drf.com. But if you've read it, if you haven't read it and just have general handicapping questions, I'm sure he'd be willing to tackle those. Speaking of Maloney, we've also got our book giveaway. That's coming to a close soon. For that, all you have to do is leave a review of our show on iTunes. JK, what's going on over there? I'm hearing all kinds of weird background noise.
Well, it's not me. I'm muted up.
Okay, not you. I don't know what's going on. But sometimes they tell me I hear these weird things, but then you don't hear them on the show. So my attitude is I'm just going to go ahead and ignore them. Let's move on to some questions from listeners, though, about racing that's going on now. And the first one, how fortuitous is this, JK? Maybe we'll lead with the Fu Manchu bet after all, because the first listener question has to do with Sharp Azteca. This one comes in from Lewis, and he says, do you think Sharp Azteca will have a tough time on the lead in the Cigar Mile with pressure potentially coming from Americanized, Seymour Dini, and Summer Revolution, and maybe he'll fade before the wire. Big factor to me that he came out of the BC Mile, Dirt Mile, tired, which never happens to him after a race. And then there's some other follow-up questions about the Cigar Mile. But let's just start with the Cigar Mile today. Let's do things a little bit differently and dive right in. Sharp Azteca, what do you think of him?
I love him in this spot. You know, we talked about it last night on the NYRA Bets webinar handicapping session we did last night with Mike Beer. I'm a sucker for speed. We've talked about that a lot, and we talked about an idea, a handicapping theory last night that I learned the hard way as a young player with Game On Dude, and maybe there's a better horse to use as an example, but I think Game On Dude's a perfect one for old and new fans. Game On Dude was the type of horse that if he went 48, 49 to the half, that took away his advantage. He was better off going 46, 47, kind of gutting the other speed, getting the other stalkers into a quicker tempo than they're used to, and then sucking the closers in as well to a little bit of a brisker pace than they're used to. And then that's really what his advantage was. He was a fast horse, and he excelled in that situation. American Pharoah is another one that I think that was like that. I mean, we didn't see him go too quick too often, but I think he excelled in those situations as well. I think Sharp Azteca is the same way. I do understand that the pace wasn't exactly as fast as you would expect it to be in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. However, there's two factors that I think are important to take into consideration about that effort. One, we've talked about the jockey's dilemma. I think he invited Battle of Midway into the race by going slower, and I think it's pretty obvious. Like Pete made a joke last night that even his mother mentioned at Thanksgiving dinner that the inside was not where you wanted to be on Breeders' Cup weekend, and that's where Sharp Azteca saw himself to be a majority of the time. No, he was not directly on the rail. However, I look at the inside-outside bias situation is resembling more of a beach where it's a gradual thing. It's more of a gradient in terms of if the inside is good, it's not just that one path that's good. It's the fact that the inside paths are better than the outside paths. It just happens to be more obvious the closer you get to the rail. So for all of those reasons, I think Sharp Azteca is going to excel. I think that him going faster is actually going to help him. I think it's going to be more advantageous to him. And I love the rider change as well, which we talked about last night. I love Paco. I love his aggression. But as the question alluded to, when Sharp Azteca is getting a little bit tired late from going quick, I'd like to have Javier Castellano's finish to get me home.
He's a great finisher, that's for sure. Lot to chew on there, JK, from what you said. Let's turn it into a general question about pace dynamics, because I think what you said, while I agree with it in a lot of ways, it's very complicated and it's very tricky. Because I think what most of us learn about pace dynamics in the first order is that going, generally speaking, we're very conscious of races where speed horses are going to go too fast. We always, the easiest thing to look for, the first thing most people look for in pace dynamics, this came up in the interview I did with Chris Felica this week, that's up right now on DRF.com. First thing he does when he looks at a race is he's looking for two pace scenarios. He's looking for scenarios where a horse is going to be loose on the lead, presumably able to, people often think of it as controlling a slow pace. You hear that term a lot. And that's something that Sharp Azteca, if you looking at the races in his form, he's had the advantage of doing on a number of occasions. Or they're looking for a situation where a horse is going to go too fast, or more typically a group of horses, typically more than two, sometimes just two. But when there's two, they do seem to have a way, as Mike Maloney likes to say, of slowing it down enough where they have it between them. But a situation where there's an abundance of speed going really fast and it sets up for a closer. The situation you're describing is neither of those. I'll give you first crack at reconciling it.
Yeah, well, the first thing I think to keep in mind about Sharp Azteca is I'm looking back to his past performances, and there's not really a race where he spit it. I mean, okay, his second race is going 7 furlongs in a maiden race. I kind of spit it a little bit. Maybe the Woody Stevens, but he didn't really spit the bit. There's two different types of speed horses. There's horses that are very fast that are game, and those are the ones that I think are the real dangerous ones. Those are the ones I think that you want going a little bit quicker. Then there is kind of the more of the, no offense, the cheaper speed. They're really fast. They'll kind of get out there a little bit, but they're not exactly the most courageous types, and so they'll sometimes allow horses to pass them. Sharp Azteca does not want to be passed. And so, in my opinion, when he goes fast, the other ones are going fast too, and his gameness will keep him involved. And I think Game On Dude was the same way. I also think we've talked about it a million times, and Hawk Bill was kind of our poster child for this. When your weapon is speed, you don't want to invite closers into the race. And you invite them into the race by going 48, 49, so on and so forth. So I think that those are the two differences. And it's a very slippery slope. It's not very often. I mean, if you're looking at Aqueduct today in the 5th and you see a horse that could be into a 3-horse duel and a 16 claimer, I'm not going to say, oh, that horse, he just wants to go faster. It's a different scenario when you're dealing with a grade 1 animal like Sharp Azteca, where it feels like, to me, that's kind of his wheelhouse where he's going to excel.
There's a few metaphors I like to return to on this. One comes from Paul Matisse, and that's the idea of the line of essentially like where a race is run efficiently. And I think where speed horses were really good, and I love the point you made about class, JK, that this is much more relevant with the best horses. If they're running too far under that line, let's call that line just sort of like the average that a good horse is going to cover a distance of, in this case, say a mile. If you're too far under that line, you can get into trouble. Doesn't mean you want to be way over the line. If you go way over the line, you're going to be in trouble too. That's going to lead to those meltdown situations that we were talking about before. But I think you want to be a little bit above that line, like to really make the race a true test. And I had fun. As upset as I was with you and JK, I'm still entitled to make fun of you for this because that bottle of scotch has not yet arrived. But when you no-showed the other week and Craig Milkowski played Lou Gehrig to your Wally Pip, he was using human road racing metaphors to talk about pace in horse racing. And I think one applies here. And again, it's that idea, if your superiority is speed, why not from the get-go use that speed? Especially if you've got the kind of blend of speed and just enough stamina. I don't think there's any question about Sharp Azteca's ability to quote unquote get the mile here. Why would you not use your run as efficiently as you can early and be able to carry on late, as opposed to going too slow? And I like that phrase that you use, inviting some other horses who maybe should have to make up 3 lengths from the pace call. Why let them only have to make up 1 length? That's going to be a big difference. And different horses have different weapons. We've talked about this before in the show, so hopefully we're not belaboring it. But to me, in that Hawksmoor example from Woodbine, it was very helpful. I was in the 10 at Woodbine, so I was watching that stretch run with the naked eye. And you could just see that over a short distance of time, I'm spacing on the other horse now, which is terrible, but the horse that ended up winning that race, you could just see over the short burst, the other horse had more acceleration. Acceleration wasn't the game of Hawksmoor. His game was the ability, in theory, to click off 12-second furlongs from the jump. And when the first, whatever it ended up being in that race, 4 furlongs, 5 furlongs were more like 13 seconds. It took him out of his game. Still had the stamina and class. He almost won the race, but he didn't give himself the best position to win.
Right, exactly. And just to clarify, Hawk Bill, you're thinking of another front-running Hawk.
I said Hawksmoor. Hawk Bill.
front running. It's a front running hawk on the turf, so that's fair.
No, that's a bad mistake. One's a filly and one just ran. Hawk Bill.
I'm gonna make an attempt at a sport that I'm not that good at, but it makes sense to me. Baseball. To me, if you have a speed horse that you overrate early and take away that advantage that they have, it's kind of like the Houston Astros in Game 6 or Game 7, bringing in Justin Verlander in the 7th or 6th inning and using some third, fourth, fifth guy in the rotation to start that game. You're giving away your advantage. Like let your good guy get you into a position of power and then try to kind of coast home with the below the second tier or the 6th, 7th guy in the rotation. I think it's the same thing. If you have a horse like Sharp Azteca, Game On Dude, American Pharaoh, Songbird, horses like that, you want to put them in the race, and what you want to do is allow that to help you along. And I honestly, I fell in love. I had an idea about this. This is a real thing that happened when I was coaching high school football. We're always around each other, the coaches, and we get into these really silly games. We do like the Coaches Olympics, and it's just we get bored and we're there so much, and you just try to keep things live. We did a race one time. I think we did like a 400 between a bunch of out-of-shape, has-been adult men. And I used a strategy that is this exact same strategy, and it paid off. We ran the 400, and I went out there, and I ran the first part of the 400 as fast as I possibly could. And the idea that these other guys were reserving their energy, and I wasn't even nearly as athletic or as in shape as some of the other guys, but I still won just because I just got so far ahead that I got all of them off the bridle and they couldn't catch me because they were tired too. I mean, I was practically walking home, but they were walking home too because they weren't in a position to do that. I think you could do that in racing if you get other horses off the bridle.
You put pressure on them. You put pressure on the jockey as to when to hit the button. And also, horses can get discouraged. We've seen it. And that's that idea of coming off and then maybe eventually spitting, just giving up, basically giving up. It happens. It's a real dynamic. Now, I do caution going, obviously, there's such a thing, obviously, as going too fast. And we're not advising that. But it is interesting with as conservatively as races are typically run these days on the East Coast, especially on the turf, of course, you can lose sight of what a weapon that could be. And I think it's very easy to see pace dynamics as, well, there's only 3 of them. There's too fast, there's the loose leader who can control, there's the horse that goes too fast, and there's normal. The fact is that there's, how many gradations of pace scenarios? Dozens, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I blame a lot of this problem on owners and trainers. And here's why. Is because it's much easier from a jockey's perspective to come back and say, they went too slow, I was reserved, I was trying to save some kick, and they just went too slow in front of me. It's much easier to make that mistake for a jockey. It's much more accepted than making the, I went too fast mistake. It's just so much more obvious to the layman eye when you go too fast than when you go too slow. Because then you can blame it on other people. Oh, well, they went too slow in front of me. What was I supposed to do? You told me to take back and make one run. That's what I did. It's a much easier way for them to get forgiveness.
There's a great podcast that touches on some of these issues in other sports, actually. And what's it called? It's called Revisionist History, the Malcolm Gladwell podcast. Gladwell, of course, wrote Blink and The Tipping Point and so many great books. Definitely a writing nonfiction hero of mine. And he talks about how there are things in sports where there's a better way of doing it, but nobody wants to do it because of how it looks, essentially. And the prime example is the Rick Barry underhand free throw thing. It's better. There are fewer moving parts, like a proven deal. You are going to hit your free throws more by doing the little underhand spin. And even Wilt Chamberlain, with all the problems he had shooting free throws, when he went to the underhand, became I don't know what the percentage is, but twice as good or whatever at free throws. So you're talking about, points a game for his team, and still abandoned it because the other guys called him a wimp or whatever they said. And it's not exactly the same, but it's a little bit the same. There is this cultural idea, I think, that you look worse and people make fun of you or get mad at you when you push the button too early. But it's we always say we prefer those sins of aggression as opposed to the sins of passivity that we see so much.
I think there's something to going for two every time in football. When we coached, we did 7-on-7 a lot, which is essentially just pass hole. And it was a big deal here, very competitive in the summer for our kids. We didn't coach them, but we showed up and watched them play, and our starters would play. It was a really good opportunity for them to get some extra work. And we had a rule for our guys that if we scored first, we always went for two, because the idea is you're going to have to score again anyways. But if you did that in the NFL and you got beat, talk radio and your fans would beat you up the next day, even though you did something that in truth gives you a distinct advantage, and it makes sense from a mathematical standpoint as well. But anyways, I think it's the exact same point, like you mentioned about the free throws. It's easier to criticize the aggression than it is to criticize passiveness. And so unfortunately we see that a lot in sports, and it's prevalent in racing as well.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Maybe even a better example in football is the going for it on fourth down. If you ever look at some of the math on that, essentially all coaches are way, way too conservative on the math on going for it on fourth down in certain situations. And it's the same deal. It's the fear of getting called out. One of a football coach's jobs is to keep his job, not necessarily to get a couple extra percentage points chance in winning an individual football game. And that's why you see that. And it's a tough thing, and it's a tough thing in all sports and tough for riders. And that's where the whole idea of the jockey's dilemma, comes from.
But you know who gets away with it is guys like Mike Smith and guys like Gary Stevens and Jose Ortiz is getting a little bit closer to that, but he still gets criticized. When you have the successes on the wall, you can get away with going for it on fourth down like Bill Belichick can. Because what are you going to tell Bill Belichick? He'll just hold his hand up and wave his ring fingers at you. And so it's an interesting dynamic. It definitely is, and I think we see it in racing a lot as well. And even the other thing is like trainers, bringing a horse back off a 2 weeks rest or giving a horse a 7-week break. Bob Baffert can get away with giving American Pharoah 7 weeks off and then running them in the Breeders' Cup Classic, where someone like, so-and-so Smith would get in trouble for it, and people would give him a hard time. It's interesting.
Were you thinking of the old Falcons coach? Was it Mike Smith who got in all kinds of guff for a very similar thing to what Belichick had done? And it's not like Belichick didn't get guff when he tried it and failed in that game against the Colts either. Nobody's immune, which is why I feel like we have to do a better job as racing fans of like accepting when that happens instead of just being another voice saying, they went too fast. And I'm guilty of it. I've done it here on the show with certain horses. I did it with the filly of Chad Brown's, that Grand Jeté. I was upset about that very aggressive ride and I guess it was the Flower Bowl. But I mean, it's kind of hypocritical based on the other stuff that I'm saying. You mentioned the Ortiz's, JK. If folks haven't read the New Yorker article by John Seabrook it's really about racing, but through the lens of the rise of the Ortiz brothers, boy, was that a terrific piece of journalism. It sounds like Mr. Seabrook will be able to join us for a few minutes on the show on Tuesday. I'm really looking forward to talking to him about writing. I thought there were many remarkable things about that piece, but none more so than the way I felt as a racing outsider, he was able to capture some really true slices of horse racing life. And not only that, I'm going to go so far as to say I learned something reading that article.
No, I thought it was phenomenal. It was a really good article. I think those two kids are highlights in our sport. we focus on athletes doing the wrong thing. We focus on domestic situations, on drunk driving and drugs and performance enhancing situations and partying and all these things. And we have these two guys that wake up every morning and go to the track and have great attitudes and then go home to their families and play video games and get up the next morning and do it all over again. So I think it's important that we make sure that we highlight those two guys. And I thought the piece was exciting. I thought it was really cool. It was fun to read. One of my favorite parts is when they talk about Jose winning the title and Angel Cordero and Irad's conversation about whether or not Irad was going to show up to the presentation. I thought it was extremely insightful and funny, and I could almost see it happening. And speaking of those two guys, and I know we were talking about the Cigar Mile a little bit, those are two guys that I'm definitely going to be using underneath Sharp Azteca for sure, with Mind Your Biscuits, Seymour Dini. So they're exciting guys.
Yeah, we'll come full circle. Let's do another question, and then we'll start talking about these stakes races from Aqueduct. I also want to get in a minute of tournament talk, but let's go to the next question. This one came from Peter. He's very excited about the idea of our doing some more listener question shows. He's a 30-year-old who loves racing, knows he's in the age bracket minority, but is interested in making more friends who share his hobby. He has an 8-month-old and lives in Minnesota, about 30 minutes from Canterbury, so can't hang out there all the time, but goes to the track 5 or 10 times a year. Part of the local horse racing partnership, but not a lot of people his age there. Would like some advice as to how to make more friends in the industry he can talk, shop, and handicap with. Thanks for the question, Peter. I got a lot on this, but there's one answer that I think we could kind of race to, and I'll let you have the layup if you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I would participate in every contest that Canterbury has, and I would sit in there and look for the young guy and say hi to him. The guy that, and look for the old guy too. I mean, that's how I, one of my best friends in racing and listener of the podcast, Eric Vilik, we were at the Hawthorne tournament, and when you're looking around the room, I said, he looks a little different than the rest of these guys, a little bit less gray. Let me say hi to him and introduce myself. And we've been good friends ever since that day. And so participating in tournaments, I think, is one of the biggest things that you can do to kind of find like-minded people that share your enthusiasm with the sport and also share your enthusiasm in the same way. You can find guys that are interested in racing, but when you find guys that are as interested as you are, it's a whole nother dynamic. It opens up a whole lot of other doors for opportunities to kind of further your friendships that are kind of circling around racing.
Somewhere in that answer, JK called me old. I think. That is one of there were actually two layup answers to the question: contest, and it can be tricky with small children, as we know. But if you're strategic about the events you choose to play, and you can probably make a little bit of that work, there really isn't much of a better place to get involved. I was going to mention the Nexus Racing Club, JK, an organization I've been meaning to reach out to Sam to see if she might come on and discuss this further. But I had the pleasure of meeting up with the group out at the Breeders' Cup for a pleasing lunch at the Brigantine a full month ago now at the Breeders' Cup. I know you've had some dealings with them. You want to explain how the club works?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on the logistics, but essentially what it is, it's a group of young racing fans who are getting the owner's experience without the owner's burden. And they've been supported by, I believe, Jack Wolf at Starlight Racing,
for sure,
Craig Bernick at Glen Hill Farm, and forgive me, but L&J Foxwood. I can't remember who the head person is at L&J Foxwoods, but they've kind of essentially leased them horses to allow them to kind of have that owner's experience, the boxes, the winner's circle, the decision-making process when it comes to spots, understanding how the condition book works and what your goals are with a filly mare or colt, so or even gelding. So it's a really cool thing, and we've had some pretty good times hanging out with them and getting to know some of their young fans. So that's another opportunity to find some like-minded participants that you could exchange numbers with and find opportunities to hang out with.
it's like Menudo, right? You reach a certain age and they kick you out. Is it 30 or is it 35? I don't know, but there is an age there is an age restriction to it, which I think is great. It's a great deal and a great opportunity for networking. And just from the folks I've met who are involved, I couldn't recommend it. If you're in, check on their website at what the limitations are and what the costs are, but it's something I definitely recommend getting involved in. Other obvious answer is just doing social media stuff. I mean, horse racing Twitter has its ups and downs, but I mean, I think within a few hours of participating, you can sort of get the sense of who the people are, depending on what your personality is and what you're looking for, who are going to be offering the kinds of comments and vibes that you're interested in getting. And I've met so many people through horse racing Twitter. So I think being strategic about that is not a bad idea. And Equestricon is another thing I'd mention as a place to go to potentially meet people.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Another one that I didn't experience this, but I know that our friends Travis Stone and Nick Tamero, they've got a pretty extensive friendship dating back, I think, almost 10 years or more now. And Pat Cummings, I think, was involved in that equation as well. They became friendly on a message board.
Derby Trail.
Kind of, yeah. I think it was actually, maybe it was Derby Trail or possibly Pace Advantage. Anyways, they just kind of started talking. They realized some like-mindedness, and they exchanged numbers and met at a racetrack one day, and they've been friends ever since. And it's led to friendships like Philly Joe was introduced through that whole circle, and Jack Jenkins and Dan Kovaleski. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get involved. I think putting yourself out there is the biggest thing that will help. It's say hello to people and reach out to people. I've had a lot of people that message me on Twitter and exchange numbers. And our buddy, I forget his last name, but our buddy, I think Andrew, the young kid that plays at USC, hung out with us.
Andrew, right?
Yeah, hung out quite a bit with us at Breeders' Cup, and I think he had a good score, and he even earned his way by purchasing an adult beverage based on his score. So things like that, I think, can really help you expand your racing circle.
And the other thing I'd say, whether you're talking social media or message boards, not to impugn any one or any place in particular, but like don't hold. There's going to be a variety of different personalities and people who view the game with different levels of cynicism, etc. Like don't be discouraged if you see something that you don't necessarily like. It doesn't necessarily fit in with your vision of what you want your racing fan experience to be right away. Like continue to look around and you'll find your people. I'm confident. And, thanks, Peter, for that question. Was that answer political enough, JK?
Absolutely.
Hawkbill was beaten by Johnny Bear. That was the horse I was trying to think of before. And we'll dig on that other information we were trying to find for you before. What do you think? Should we talk about some races in the meantime?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start off. Should we do the whole pick 5 or just the stakes? I can't remember. Did you have a strong opinion in the second?
I mean, no, we didn't. I think that was it wasn't an all button because I fundamentally disagree with that, but it was a pretty wide spread. I think we'll just do the stakes.
Okay, let's stick to the stakes. I thought I'm not telling you anything that probably anybody who looked at the PPs for 5 seconds wouldn't also say, but Jameson and Ginger look super duper strong in here. We did have a question about horses on this card who might have been affected by biases in their last starts. I thought that might also be the case for Jameson and Ginger. I was thinking, if you were to play, if you were a NYRA Bets person who was going to play the pick 5 or you were going to be out at Aqueduct, my idea might be to just start off strong with Jameson and Ginger, and then if that opinion is wrong, if I'm wrong about her, just then come back and maybe look at the pick 4 or even just the late pick 3 at that point. Is that being too bullish?
No, I think she's a single A type, especially with the improvement that she's clearly seen getting to Chad. And no offense to Rudy, maybe she just wasn't going in the right direction, and he was still trying to figure out, and she was obviously purchased. But by Juddmonte, because I don't believe Juddmonte had her when she was with Rudy. Makes sense. Juddmonte buys her, gives her to Chad. I think they did the same thing with Paula Silver Lining. So, look, I think the horse is super live in this spot. The two horses that I'm also going to at least point people in the direction of, and I heard Paul Matisse actually talk about this on Steve Bick, so I want to make sure I cite his opinion here. With Highway Star, what happened there was it was like a lot of horses that were forwardly placed in that extremely fast pace against extremely good horses were just absolutely shocked. Like it really kind of, for lack of a better word, punched them in the nose. And I think that you saw that with how badly she stopped. And if you look back at what she's done, the consistent figures, the consistent efforts, different distances, different racetracks, I wouldn't be too quick to toss her based on her last performance. She could be dangerous in this spot, getting back on the East Coast. So Highway Star is one that I would consider. I wouldn't use both of those as A horses, obviously, but we've talked about a bunch on the show. With it just feels very it makes my teeth itch from an equity standpoint using two short price horses in one leg. Now, I would pick one of them and then maybe use the other one as a B or fade one completely, with Pete's idea of just coming back in the pick four if for whatever reason you get beat. The other horse that I was interested in is Indulgent. It's a half sister to Frosted. We know what Frosted did in a 1-turn mile setting. We talked about it. The inside hasn't been ideal at Aqueduct so far this winter. Indulgent found a lot of running down on the inside, so there's a possibility for improvement there, second off of a break. I'll probably save a little bit with Indulgent. This would be a situation where maybe A horse Jameson Ginger, B horse Highway Star, C horse Indulgent, and that way you feel like you're in a better position equity-wise. But that's kind of how I see the race.
I think that makes perfect sense. We said we're not going to talk about the seventh race. We both sort of see it as a spread race, but if you do want some real details on that, you can go to drf.com/YouTube. Check out the NYRA bets handicapping session that JK and I did with Mike Beer last night. We had a lot of fun doing that. Also just to give some more plugs out. Definitely, if you haven't listened to that Paul Matisse interview, which was basically a red board of the Breeders' Cup, which was essentially what the format Craig and I stole for the show that JK decided he had better things to do than appear for a couple of weeks ago. But go through and listen to Paul's comments. So much good stuff in there. And I like the terminology he used talking about the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. And it was something that to give real full credit where credit is due, I think he gave to the term credit to his brother Greg, the trainer. And is that one of the races he described as a scramble, JK?
Absolutely.
And it's just interesting to hear him talk about that. The Bick archive is wonderful, by the way, stevebick.com. You can go on there, and lots of good stuff. And I think the Night School broadcasts are archived on there, too. And you can find my recent appearance from last week, also with Mike Maloney talking about the new book. You can also find that through Horse Player Now. But the Bick archives in general, I just have the show appear in my podcast feed. And whenever I get a chance, I go through and listen, both his regular guests and special visitors, often worth paying attention to.
Yeah, if you want comedy, one of the best ones to listen to is Andy. I love Andy Serling on there. I think some people might misinterpret Andy as being very mean to Steve, but I've seen them in personal settings. They are very good buddies. Friends, yeah. and it's part of just like Andy's stick to just give Steve a hard time because Steve sets himself up sometimes. So it's don't take it so seriously, but it is funny.
Andy has a very dry sense of humor, to say the least, and it's early morning for a rock and roll guy like Andy too. So he can sometimes the combination of the dry wit and the laid back morning energy might give the wrong idea, but I agree. He's generally hilarious and always informative on there, and it's fun when he gets animated like he did the other week. Andy on Bick talking about the Breeders' Cup scandal was priceless. There was something later in that hour that I didn't like as much, but Andy's stuff was fantastic. Let's talk Demoiselle, JK. Don't need to get me off on another tangent there. Always an interesting race, watching these 2-year-old fillies negotiate the 2 turns, going a mile and an eighth. before you talk about your specific opinion of the race, talk to me about your betting philosophy. Is this a race you're excited about betting, one you're going to bet because it's part of this late pick 3 and pick 5? Talk generally and then drill down to the specifics on this year's Demoiselle for me.
Well, I think that this horse is 30-1 and deserves some credit for a great name. That's Stakes on a Plane. I think that's really funny. But I'm a big fan of good named horses. Mike kind of jumped the gun on me last night with getting to kind of be enthusiastic about this idea that I'm going to talk about. So maybe this is my opportunity to kind of have my soapbox moment. But I'm completely against Wonder Godot, and the fact that she's 2-1 on the morning line and will probably be favored, to me is a little bit crazy. I get it. She comes from a big operation. I get it. She's coming in off of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile race where she had a little trouble at the 8th pole. But let's not forget that, like Pete's mom told us, the outside was where you wanted to be that day. That horse found herself in that situation. She's going to be extremely overbet with Cassie and Johnny and the figure and all of those things. So I'm completely against Wonder Godot. It's a complete toss for me. I think this is one of those opportunities where you can really make some money if you're right about that situation. There's a huge jump in equity when you toss a horse like Wonder Godot. And in fact, I would even support the idea of using the 2 favorites in the first leg with the Chad, Jameson and Ginger, and Highway Star, if you can throw a horse out like Wonder Godot. So I'm interested in horses that are going to line up more in the middle of the gate. I think the 5 Indy Union is extremely live off of that last effort at Belmont. More Power, I think, is interesting because the stretch out would concern me from a pace standpoint because, I worry that they could kind of get hooked up with the rail horse Daisy. But the good news is it's the same trainer. You got Kendrick on Daisy, which Kendrick is obviously going to go. You have Irad on More Power, who is clearly going to rate. And I think that they could sit a really good spot and get first run. In a tournament setting, my exciting play in here at a big price would be Layla Noir. We've talked about it before, about the inside not being ideal at Laurel. Watch that last race. Was slammed at the start, missed the break by 4, and ran on to win on an off-the-turf situation. And my jockey crush, Manny Franco, shows up there. And so I'm going to look at using the 5, 6, and 7. I'll use Daisy defensively just because I'm afraid she's going to get loose. But I think that there's prime picking to beat both of these favorites here with some horses that are going to be going a mile and an 1/8 for the first time, but I think could excel at that in the 5, 6, and 7.
Well, Layla Noor is the one for me here, JK. Not only the impressive tape from last time, but we've talked about it before. I love when stamina is going to come into play. And I think, 9 furlongs, that's a significant jump when you're looking at a 2-year-old filly. And when you have had a filly who's had the opportunity, the advantage, I'm even going to say, of all the different ways you can get fitness into your horse at a place like Fair Hill Training Center, and a trainer who I also trust very much to get to imbue stamina in his charges in Arnaud Delacour, though he's obviously had plenty of success with sprinters as well. But I like everything about Layla Noor, and I think she's going to be a little under the radar with the low figure last time. But I think the race itself is more impressive than the figure, and I think distance might be her friend. I don't disagree with the others you mentioned. It is also, as we talked about with Mike Beer last night, an interesting situation where you're going to probably be looking at the top last out Beyer Speed figure horse in More Power as potentially the third choice. So I like that. And I think you nailed it, man. I don't see a reason to be bullishly against Daisy, but more of a defensive use. I don't think Wonder Godot has to get anything. And I think Layla Noor is going to be somewhere at a big price.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. It's a fun, interesting race. It's just one of those deals with Daisy, like you mentioned. I can think of a lot of reasons why I want to try to beat her, and then she goes out there and she just gallops and wins by 4 again, and then you're sitting there thinking, God, I was trying to be too cute.
If speed's good too, that'll come into play with her, right? Because I mean, she should be out there winging.
Right, but the concern is like we said, is the inside hasn't been ideal.
Right.
It hasn't been terrible every day, but it just hasn't been like that. Oh, I want to go to the Golden Rail. It hasn't.
If
been
it's
that
going to
for
change,
sure.
don't you think Saturday is the kind of day it might change for, though? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so
For sure.
when you have the big stakes races, sometimes you'll see tracks get turned over. It's just something to keep an eye out for. That's all I'm saying. I think I couldn't make my. That's a situation where I definitely want to see a few races, and I might be out running around. I might just show up in time for the sixth race. Susan's out in California this weekend, leaving me on daddy daycare. Fortunately, my 4-year-old Charge is a big fan of horse racing, so we shouldn't have much problem getting her and some toys in the bunker for a productive afternoon of betting on Saturday. But I'll watch the tape of those early races and see what I think about the track.
You'll be really happy about this. Austin told me, I haven't told you this yet. Austin told me yesterday, we were talking about Christmas, going to L.A., and obviously the day after Christmas is Santa Anita opening day, and I'd like to make that a tradition. And he said, Dad, are we going to the racetrack? And I said, yeah. And he said, that's awesome, Dad. I love the racetrack. And I was like, really? I was like, do you want some candy? What do you? And then he said, yeah, I like the racetrack. It's really fun. You get to do a lot of electronics. Pear Bear's there sometimes, and you get to stay up late. And I was like, well, whatever you're interested in, buddy.
Yeah, our parenting possibly questionable there, but it did work out well in Saratoga, and we hope you guys, in addition to your tradition of doing Santa Anita opening day, which I think is phenomenal, will also consider adding a ritual week at Saratoga to your packed travel itinerary. Let's move on to the Rems and JK. We've got under 15 minutes left. That should be perfect. I think we're doing pretty well here. Similar situation here. We've got the 2-year-old Colts trying to get the mile in an eighth. I remember, and I feel super guilty about this. It came up on the show last night, my little red board about Avery Island, and when he walked by on August 19th, the day I thought you were at Saratoga, and I thought I'd made this observation to you. You understood the hype looking at the horse, but also seemed like the kind of horse for whom that 6 furlongs was just always going to be inadequate. And, surprise, surprise, the light has gone on since the distances have gotten longer. It's taken you a while to warm to this horse, but where are you now with Avery Island?
I get it. I think that I would like to be coming in a little bit more under the radar with this horse.
It's sort of the opposite of that, right?
Right. Yeah. I think everyone knows and everyone sees it. And I typically don't like horses that are, I don't want to bet horses that are winning by 5, winning by 4, easy with semi-easy leads. I mean, none of those leads were really challenging. So I get it. Mike Beer made some really good points about the horse from a class standpoint, and also from just a pedigree standpoint and a trainer standpoint and a tactical standpoint. So Avery Island's one that I have to use. There's other horses that get me a little bit more excited. We talked about Catholic Boy. That horse has continued to impress. Breeders' Cup Juvenile performance was good. The Saratoga race, the With Anticipation was good. Obviously trying dirt for the first time, but More Than Ready is I think often looked at as a turf sire, but you got horses like Verrazano and others that can excel on the dirt as well. So Catholic Boy would be one I would consider as an A horse. And then there's 2 other horses that I'm still working through the process of where they'll fall on my tickets, A's or B's. And that's Biblical for Todd Pletcher. I think that one of the things when we have these young horses, and something that I started to try to get better at looking at the 3-year-old races, is horses that have been challenged at the distances that we're running, they've already answered the question. And Biblical's answered the question of mile and an eighth, although it was in a maiden special weight. But if you look at his PPs, you'll notice there's a guy by the name of Todd Pletcher training the horse, and I don't think Todd Pletcher has any problem getting young horses, 2-year-olds and or 3-year-olds, to excel in a mile and an eighth. And then the breeding, of course, it's a Tappet half to Princess of Silmar, who won the mile and an eighth Kentucky Oaks, and so I think Biblical's one that could continue to improve and could maybe just shock these horses going a mile and an eighth this early in their careers. And then the Arnold Delacour show. I don't know what kind of haircut he has, but there's an opportunity for us to get an Arnold Delacour wig. Then we might need to order it. The same idea. The Laurel inside is not where you want to be. The performance was impressive, winning by 8 and he's one that I could see that could shock a little bit. I have to Calamity Kate, who is a horse recently was on the 3-year-old kind of distaffy type of scene running long, and so the pedigree's there for Vouch as well, for Lael Stable, the owners of the late Marlboro.
So for you, it's a spread race among those various runners?
Yeah, I would think. I feel it makes my stomach hurt a little bit to think of using Avery Island, Biblical, Catholic Boy, and Vouch as all A horses. It feels very inefficient. So I'm gonna have to going back to Steve Bick and Johnny DeSantis always saying, I'm gonna have to crack some eggs here.
Yep.
I don't know yet. I mean, I guess I'll wait to get a little chatter. I think I want Vouch as an A horse, and I think I would move Biblical back to a B horse.
I mean, the negative on Biblical, you make the point about the distance, but at the same time, you could also argue that Biblical's like maybe a little exposed in speed figure terms. So we've seen the horse run, it seems like it wasn't a fast pace or anything, but I'm not sure it was slow enough to give an excuse for a 73 figure. I'm thinking the winner's going to run quite a bit faster than that. Of the ones you mentioned, if you had to bust somebody back, that would probably be the direction I would go.
Right, but I also think that there's something to the idea that you're going to see Todd Pletcher second off of a break, going 1 mile and 1/8 for the second time in a graded stake. It feels like there's some improvement to be had there just on the surface of the circumstance. So
it's possible, but I mean, I've also noticed with him, even in situations where you'd think a race was a clear prep, that he brings them back from a break fully formed, and they don't necessarily improve. It's not like some old school trainer whose horses, who's known as get a race into them, have them step up. We're probably spending too much time talking about an 8-1 in the morning line horse. For me, it's Catholic Boy here, and I think it's one of those things where you have to consider the whole distance concept. And when you're running in July and August, there aren't long. You can ask yourself, why is this horse running on turf? And sometimes it's just clearly and only because of pedigree, but other times it's because they're not running mile dirt races in the summer at Saratoga. So if we've seen that this horse has quality and he can transfer that quality to the dirt and on pedigree, it certainly seems reasonable. Maybe it's not that he's some turf horse just trying the dirt. Maybe he's a horse who needs distance, now getting the most distance he's ever seen. So not just saying that because we like the connections. It really does make a lot of sense to me. And maybe with so many different ways to go, Catholic Boy could get a little bit lost in the betting. We can't let the race go, JK, though, without talking about the 7 Al-Kadam. I'm not sure how you pronounce that exactly, but that's what I'm going with. For Chad Brown, 7-2 on the morning line, and looks like a horse who will take a lot of money in here. I was kind of against just based on the fact that it appeared to be a setup last time, but it seems like we should at least address this Chad Brown runner. What you hadn't mentioned, are you actively anti or just like other things better?
Well, Chad, Jose, overbet. I know that for sure. I don't like horses from a Timeform US perspective that have red in their early portions of their races, and they were far back and closed. Like you said, it's a setup. The horse was 3-2 that day. Got a pace fair. Got a pace to run into, and still ran third. I just. And he's going to be overbet. I'll let that one beat me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of horse that under other circumstances I would use defensively. And honestly, in a turf race, equivalent Chad Brown looking horse, I think I've just gotten to the point where I've just signed a contract at the end of the year. I'm going to just spend X amount of dollars, including Chad Brown turf runners. So I don't, and I'm not saying every single one, but those ones in the middle that I kind of want to beat for Chad on the turf, at this point, I pretty much will automatically just try to get in there for a penny defensively. This is one I'm okay losing to. That's where I landed.
Completely agree.
All right, let's go on. Let's return to our discussion of the Cigar Mile. JK, you mentioned that Sharp Azteca for you is a strong, you said it was a lone A, right?
Lone A, yeah, I'm going to use some B's underneath, but a lone A, not an ice cold A.
When you say B's underneath, you're talking verticals, or you're going to use some B's in the picks as well?
Yeah, I'm going to use B's in the picks as well. But yeah,
okay.
I'm taking a speed horse in a race that has a lot of pace. My clever opinion is that that's not going to affect him, but Brohammer and Davidowitz and Bayer are looking at me a little bit kooky when I throw out the basic handicapping principle of when they go fast, you look for horses that are going to be finishing. So I do think there's an opportunity for that to happen. However, I'm going to be a little contrarian with the idea that Sharp Aztec is going to excel going quicker and is going to get all the other horses off the bridle.
I like our old friend Practical Joke in here. I think you've made the point about how the Jerkins was flattered in a setup, but the horse can finish. The horse loves one turn, and the horse should have an excellent pace to run at. I'm not going to go head-to-head Practical Joke against Sharp Azteca for a Fu Manchu, however. I will, even though I'm nervous about this for two reasons. Here's two reasons I'm nervous to put the Fu Manchu on the line at all against Sharp Azteca. One is this was the horse for me that solidified the bias heard around the world of the 2 days of the Breeders' Cup in real time. After that race, I was saying, okay, this thought of the bias is now, I'm going to change the way I'm betting because I believe this bias is affecting the outcome of races. So that alone makes me not want to put a ridiculous facial hairstyle against this horse. And then the other thing was I had a dream last night where Sharp Azteca won. I'm dreaming about the Cigar Mile, so deep in the tank for horse racing am I. But to be a sport, and because you haven't won anything on this show, JK, in a long, long time, if you give me Sharp Azteca heads up against the rest of the field, in other words, you're essentially taking even money on him. If you're willing to take that aggressive stand, I will put the Fu Manchu on the line. Your move, People's Champ.
Done. Signed, sealed, delivered.
No hesitation from the man. I love it. All right. Well, there. I think that's all we got on those races. We've got like a minute, 90 seconds left. Want to tell people that the new season, the new contest on publichandicapper.com is just about to begin. The Winter of Our Discontent contest. There are cash prizes. There are past performance prizes. This is another good way to meet people, to potentially get your writing about races out there, to read others' analysis. It's a lot of fun. Get used to the site. They've got 3 contests a year. They're all free, and I just can't recommend that people check it out enough. PublicHandicapper.com. Of course, we've got lots of action this weekend also over at DRF Tournaments. That's tournaments.drf.com, another Grade 1 qualifier for the World Championship of Handicapping. Will we finally see the name Jonathan Kinchin somewhere on the leaderboard in a WCH event this weekend?
Yeah, there could be a possibility. This weekend I'm daddy duty as well. So, but the kid said he likes racing, so maybe he wants to play. We'll take a look at that. One of the things I did want to say, just to get people's brains working, we'll do it a little bit later before the end of the year, is Pete and I have decided we're going to do a little bit of a show focusing on our handicapping New Year's resolutions. So, and we want obviously participation from the listeners, via Twitter or whatever, or even if through email, to kind of share some ideas of what it is we're going to talk about and what we want to work on as handicappers and bettors going into next year. I'm going to try to take it easy on ice cream and life, but there's some things I need to probably do differently from a handicapping and betting standpoint as well. So we'd like to highlight those and kind of give us all and our listeners some goals moving forward.
I love it. And yeah, just to clarify, we're not talking about the 15 pounds you want to use, that you have to be, nicer to your Aunt Sadie, whatever it is. We're talking about things that specifically have to do with your approach to handicapping and betting races. How is the ice cream free situation going? What are you're like 4 days in now?
Yeah, no, it's going all right. I don't know. I don't remember if I told this story or not, but it'll be quick. I honestly, the other day driving home, convinced myself, well, look, I know we just started, but you didn't get to really have your kill meal the day before. So why don't you just stop, get a little ice cream? I convinced myself of doing it like a true addict. And then I I intervened and stopped it. It didn't happen, but I tried.
Based on that story, though, the PTF Sportsbook is keeping. I was expecting to ease the price out from 4 to 5 to even money with 4 days in the tank, but hearing that story, I'm holding the line. 4 to 5, he'll never make it. That's all the time we have, folks. Stay tuned for our friend Matt Bernier. Coming up next, I want to thank Jonathan Kinchin. I want to thank all of you for listening, especially those of you who took the time to ask questions. Hit us up on Twitter. Shoot us an email, podcast@drf.com. We'll be back on Tuesday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornital. May you win all your photos.